and welcome to the RevOps Co-op. Today, I am thrilled to be talking to Jamie Klanac. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey, good morning, Kamala. It's nice to be with you. I am Jamie Klanac, and I've been in revenue operations for a very long time, spent most of my career at IBM. And one of the really cool roles that I had was in mergers and acquisitions, and it was integrating newly acquired companies that IBM brought into the company. And my role was to integrate all sales management, all aspects of it. At the time, I reported to the global sales operations manager for our software division, global software division, which is about $25 billion of IBM's revenue at the time. And so this was a dedicated group that I managed because you could not, do acquisition and do the work and still kind of run business as usual. So the main role that I had with mergers and acquisitions, the sales management piece, was primarily CRM migration or integration. It was commissions, reporting, sales stage mapping when we bring a company in to make sure that we aligned. We also did a lot of work with the resource deployment model where we would acquire companies and we would have to fit them into the IBM sales model roles like inside sales, direct channels, sales engineering, all those kinds of things. And then one of the big things with resources too was that we were into geo expansion outside typically of where we would acquire companies. And then there were things like lead routing, making sure that we had to hand off from marketing into sales, worked on the go-to-market strategy of having it blend into IBM. And then one of the really big things was routes to market. And that was, again, is it inside sales? Is it going to be a SMB model, enterprise, named account, that kind of thing? So when I started this, we had a team of 6 people, and this was kind of newly designed team that eventually grew to 27. And this was at a time when IBM was really into acquisitions, $20 billion of investment over a 5-year period. And so I was responsible for integrating companies like Cognos, which a lot of people have heard of. It was $1 billion revenue with 4,000 employees, down to some really medium size and some very small companies that, and all of them are unique, and all of them, just because of the size didn't mean it was complex. And it typically took anywhere from 6 to 18 months on average to get it done. So there was a lot of things that had to happen in that time period, right? I know that this is probably more extreme than most companies would deal with. I mean, the size of IBM, and to do 30 companies over a 4-year period, and all the things that I just had mentioned. But I think there's a lot of common things that people need to contemplate when they get into integration and when they get into the due diligence process and things that how it's going to change. But that's kind of the background of. It was really exciting time. I went to Asia right afterwards, and so it was just that vibe of being able to work in a large company, but work with so many different companies and learn all the tech stack and learn their process and best of breed. I could really benchmark how good we were doing compared to some of the other companies we acquired, and adopt some of the really cool things that we acquired.
Well, Jamie, I just want to say thank you for sharing your wealth of information on this topic. It's really clear that you've probably seen more of these than most of us in the community. I've been on the acquired end of an acquisition. So I came into the process really late, and I'm really interested to hear from you what the due diligence process looks like up front. Like, what are the things we should be considering as an acquiring company?
Yeah. So, and great question. And so I was part of a greater team. So think of the microcosm of IBM, every constituent, legal and HR and the DevOps, everybody was, so I had my piece of it. And so one of the areas that I would look at with our sales team. And I kind of straddled between the sales breakouts and the finance breakouts. I'd look at marketing and kind of, roam. But one of the things we're looking for was doing a deep dive on the pipeline, just to see the health and trends. Were they pumping it up just for this event or not? And then doing some research on what their go-to-market looks like, what their routes to market, what does their headcount deployment look like? Where do they have specialists in portfolio and that kind of thing. Now these are typically, there's so many other things that can kill an acquisition, and typically it's not in sales. There's other product market fit, and there's financials and a lot of other things that go into it. So typically in this area, it's not a go or no go, but it's something that you really want to start looking at and start getting acclimated with if you were to integrate. Because typically when you get to the due diligence process, there's a lot of work that's already been done to get to that point. That's the last line of defense before you acquire a company.
That makes sense. Now, when it comes to being acquired, I've seen a lot of worry and angst around company culture and how things are going to change, and if we're going to be able to keep working, or if they're going to bring in their own folks. So there's all these questions happening, but I think salespeople probably go through the most angst because they don't know how their compensation plans are changing. If you could talk through that, I think that would be really helpful.
I think that's one of the biggest issues. So assuming it's not a IP, intellectual property kind of a acquisition, you're buying the technology, it is the number one asset, and that's the sales team. And these guys are coin operated. So preventing regrettable attrition is really very key. So we would typically bring in a company and we would look to make sure that it was somewhat, SOX compliant, there had some governance over it, and typically leave them on their plan just so that we didn't change what they were looking, how they're getting paid, and get them preoccupied with stuff that, quite honestly, we need them to continue to sell and sell more. That's why we're acquiring the company. So we would keep them on their plan probably through the fiscal year. If it was really complicated, maybe a little bit longer. And then we would have to look at things like, their base comp and banding and, that kind of thing, and titles matter and all those things. And so, so that was really one of the biggest areas, and culture does matter. And coming into into IBM, when you're a small company, you're kind of like, wow, we had 200 of us, now I'm a 400,000 person company.
Yeah. Now, with salespeople, I always say, what's in it for me comes first when it comes to getting them excited about something or getting their buy off on it. What are other ways that acquiring companies can help get the sales organization excited about this new acquisition?
So one of the things, there's a number of things, but one of the big things that we would try to do, we call them synergy plays, where we would get companies would come in, and so to get the IBM colleagues excited about it, we would typically show them, because think about it, we have a customer base that they probably don't have, and that we could start doing some opportunity identification. So we would do spiffs or bonuses for the IBM colleagues. And then on the other side of that, there would be companies that, industries that we typically were everywhere in most industries, but there were a list of customers they have that we would try to get IBM products and services in. And so is that kind of the back and forth. And so we would do, it was, registering and that kind of thing, not too bureaucratic, but it went over. I mean, getting, $500,000 for, passing a lead is a pretty good deal.
Yeah. And with sales, money talks. So I'm sure that was quite motivating. So what extra complications come into play when you're acquiring a company in a region you haven't developed yet?
So that's a great question as well, because typically the companies that we were acquiring at the time were either North America or they were Western Europe. And so IBM does business in Latin America and in Asia. And so expanding that footprint is important. So we ran into some things, some product things like double byte character in Asia, where, okay, we're going to do it in, they're not the 53rd state, by the way. That, they're different, and the culture's different, and so you have to be kind of on top of those kinds of things. So we would work through that, and then it was also trying to get our IBM colleagues to understand, what's, bringing this into market, what does that do? And so there's a lot of education has to go into this, and there has to be some evangelizing from us guys like me and our sales team and that kind of thing. So, but yeah, I think, that was one of the benefits. When you look at IBM, the depth and breadth of IBM and being able to, hit all corners of the earth was a real benefit. But you had to have the enablement, product enablement, sales enablement, all of those things, and tons of education.
Yeah, I've seen some smaller mergers where there's a bit of culture shock because I think, as we were talking about offline, the United States is probably the easiest place to fire someone because we're at will. Every other region, it's just so much more complex. So being able to have some expertise and tap someone to educate you on how that all is going to be different is really critical.
Absolutely. Culture matters, and also being sensitive to, again, it's different. And I did live in Asia, and I lived there 4 years and really learned a ton about. I would fly in, and it's much different when you live there and you're with the people. And so it's very important that the integration is extra smooth, kid gloves with other geographies.
Now, system integration.
Yeah.
That's always an interesting topic. So what do you see as the biggest roadblocks to integrating systems?
So systems are very emotional for sellers. It's my process, and I get on, and my icon's there, and I click on it, and life is great, and that's how I run it. And so, that's important. And so there were times when we could adopt with some of the acquired companies because it was best of breed. And IBM really at the time, we never really had our own SaaS. We acquired it. And so we probably acquired, over time, I personally was involved out of the 30, probably 15 to 20 coming in. So we learned a ton about those kinds of things. But as a company the size of IBM, it doesn't scale some of the tools. And so one of the big things, and sometimes it's a technical issue from trying to pipe in, their super complicated CRM or whatever Salesforce automation tool into IBM. We had some technical things, but there was also, you think about most of the companies at the time I was there, 95% were on Salesforce, their CRM. And at the time, IBM was either on Siebel or Sugar CRM. So it was viewed as, you're going back to, bringing you back to a horse and buggy here. Why I had this super duper thing that was great in my company. And so that it was those kinds of things, but nothing insurmountable. And so it's having the right EQ with these guys when it comes to those things. And it does matter that, they see it as a productivity tool, and now you just changed everything up. And so we try to even that out with, there's a lot of give and take, and they're all different. All 30 were different, just like all three of my children are different. All three only children.
Well, and I always view it as combining systems as technically not that difficult because it's usually a matter of adding another object, more fields, but the people, that's the hard part to navigate. Like you said, people are emotionally attached to doing things certain ways. So yeah, people.
It is, and in the current company I'm in, we acquired a company. It's 10 million ARR. They had one product, and it took us a while to integrate because they had so many things hanging off of it. And fortunately, we were nimble enough to really accommodate a lot of that. But a company like IBM and some of the colleagues I've spoken with out in the community are kind of wrestling with this because I've got a day job, but then I also have to worry about this. And then the other thing is the professions, the resources in sales ops or rev ops or whatever, you want to make sure you hang on to some of those folks, right? That's really important, is that keeping them in the roles because they're subject matter experts. Plus, it's just right professionally for some of these. So anyway, so it was an exciting time of my career, something that I always remember, and a lot of things that I can draw on as I've subsequently left IBM and kind of understand probably better than a lot from the vantage point I had.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for sharing all this with us. Where can people find you to network?
So it's Jamie Klanac. So it's Jamie.Klanac, JAMIE.KLANAC @outlook.com. Or, as far as I know, I am the only Jamie Klanac in LinkedIn. And if there are other Klanacs that are, here in the Southeast, they've probably been on my payroll. I'm probably related to them, but they'll find you. If you get to them, they'll find me. But so
I've also seen you. Yeah, and I've also seen you in the RevOps co-op, so maybe we can bug you there too.
Absolutely, on the Slack, absolutely. Yeah, hit me up, and I love talking about this stuff, and I think revenue. This is one of the most exciting times to be in these roles. And I love to reach out and talk to whomever. And I think there's a lot more consolidation is going to happen, and M&A is going to be really important topic for a lot.
Great. Thanks again, and thanks for listening, folks.